The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the worst moments of your life always seem to arrive on the most ordinary days. I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, drinking coffee I hadn't bothered to reheat, staring out at the back field where the fog was just starting to lift off the grass. Grandma Dot had been gone for exactly 11 days. The house still smelled like her cedar and lavender and something warm underneath that I could never quite name, and I kept walking into rooms expecting to find her in them. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Clara Hendricks?" "It is." "Miss Hendricks, this is Gerald Calloway. I'm the attorney handling your grandmother's estate. I've been trying to reach you for several days. I sent a certified letter to the property address. Did you receive it?" I told him I hadn't seen any certified letter. He was quiet for a moment on the other end. "Miss Hendricks," he said carefully, "I think we need to meet. There are some things about your grandmother's estate that I'm not sure you're fully aware of. Would you be able to come to my office this week?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. I didn't know then that the certified letter had arrived 9 days earlier. I didn't know my brother Marcus had signed for it. I didn't know he'd opened it, read it, and put it in the bottom of a box he later carried out to his car. What I knew was this. I had moved back to Willowmere, Vermont, 3 years ago to take care of my grandmother. I had given up my apartment in Boston, put my design work on hold, driven north in February with 2 suitcases and a plan to stay for 3 months that somehow became 37. I had sat with her through a hip surgery and a round of pneumonia that scared us both. I had learned which pharmacy filled her prescriptions fastest and which grocery store carried the exact brand of ginger tea she refused to drink substitutes for. I had driven her to church every Sunday morning and to her book club on the first Thursday of every month, and to the cemetery on my grandfather's birthday in October so she could leave marigolds on his grave. I had not done any of this because I expected something in return. I want to be clear about that. I did it because she was Dorothy Alice Hendricks and she was the best person I had ever known, and when she needed someone, I was the one who could go. Marcus had a good reason for every year he didn't come. There was always a project at work, a conflict in his schedule, a thing with Vivian's family. He called on holidays. He sent flowers when Grandma had her surgery. He was not a bad person, exactly, or at least I had not thought so then. He was just someone who was very good at being unavailable. But he showed up for the will reading. He showed up with Vivian, who wore a cream-colored blazer and carried a folder, which I remember thinking was odd. You don't usually bring a folder to a will reading unless you're already thinking of the meeting as a transaction. Grandma Dot had built something real over her lifetime. She and my grandfather had started Hendricks & Co., print in 1978, a regional printing and publishing services company that had survived the digital shift by being early and being smart. By the time my grandfather died, it employed 42 people and served clients from Burlington to Albany. Grandma had run it herself for another decade, then sold the operating business in 2019 and kept the real estate. The farmhouse on 12 acres in Willowmere, a commercial building in Burlington that the new owners leased back from her. The equipment barn she'd converted into studio space that she rented to local artists. All of it together, conservative estimate somewhere just north of $9 million. The will reading was at Mr. Calloway's office in Burlington. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Marcus and Vivian sat together on one side of the conference table. I sat across from them. Mr. Calloway was a careful, unhurried man in his late 60s who set a glass of water in front of each of us before he sat down. He explained that he would be reading the will in its entirety. He said this slowly and specifically. He said, "The document I am about to read represents only one component of your grandmother's estate planning. I want to emphasize that before we begin." I nodded. I don't think Marcus and Vivian were listening. Vivian was looking at the folder she'd brought. The will was straightforward in the way that a first chapter can seem before you understand what book you're actually reading. Grandma left her personal property, furniture, jewelry, household effects, her Buick Enclave to be divided between Marcus and me equally. She left a cash bequest of $40,000 each to the Willowmere Public Library and to the food pantry at her church. She left her book collection to Aunt Patricia, and her recipe box to me specifically, and her pearl earrings to Marcus's daughter, Emma. And then Mr. Calloway closed the will. Marcus sat up straighter. He said, "That's it?" Mr. Calloway said, "That is the entirety of the will, yes." "What about the house?" Marcus said. The Burlington property? The studio space? Mr. Calloway looked at him with an expression that was not unkind but was also not flexible. Those assets, he said, are held in a separate revocable living trust established by your grandmother in 2021. They are not governed by the will. Vivienne opened her folder. Marcus said, "Okay, so the trust, how does that distribute?" Mr. Calloway paused. He looked at Marcus. He looked at me. He said, "I sent a certified letter to the property address approximately 10 days ago. It was signed for on delivery. I had assumed both of you had received that information." "I didn't receive any letter," I said. Mr. Calloway looked at Marcus. Marcus said, "We've been handling a lot of correspondence from the estate. There's been a lot of paperwork. Something shifted in the room that I couldn't quite name." Mr. Calloway said he would explain the trust directly. He opened a second document. He read the relevant clauses, and I will not pretend I understood every word in real time, because I didn't, because what he was saying was simultaneously very clear and completely impossible for me to take in all at once. My grandmother had placed the farmhouse, the Burlington commercial property, and the studio barn in a trust in 2021. She had named one beneficiary. She had named me. There were conditions. The Burlington property could not be sold for 5 years, so that the artists renting the studio could maintain their leases. The farmhouse could not be converted from residential use. And there was one line that Mr. Calloway read twice. Slowly, because he could see on my face that I needed him to. "It is my wish and my intention that the farmhouse at 14 Orchard Hill Road remain a place of welcome and gathering for this family, so long as my granddaughter Clara sees fit to offer it as such. She had not given me the house to keep my brother out. She had given it to me to hold it. For all of us. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in the parking garage for a while with my hands on the steering wheel, not moving. I remember texting Aunt Patricia, 'Can I call you later?' And her writing back immediately, 'I'll be up. Call whenever.' When I got back to the farmhouse, Marcus's rental car was in the driveway. He and Vivienne were in the kitchen. They had made themselves coffee. This detail, the coffee, bothered me more than it probably should have. Marcus looked up when I came in, and his face was not the face of someone who was confused or grieving or working through something difficult. His face was the face of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. "We need to talk about what happened today," he said. "Okay," I said. "That trust," he said, "was set up when Grandma was 81 years old. We have questions about her cognitive state at the time." "Her cognitive state was fine at 81, I said. "I was there." Vivienne said, "You were living here, Clara. You had access to her. You had 3 years of influence over a vulnerable elderly woman." I looked at her. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. I felt something cold and very calm move through me, the way cold water moves through a room when someone opens a window in winter, because I understood what she was suggesting, and I understood that she had been thinking it for a while. "Grandma chose her own attorney," I said. "She drove herself to that office in her own car in 2021. Mr. Calloway will tell you exactly what her state was. We're not saying you did anything illegal," Marcus said. "We're saying the situation needs to be looked at. Vivienne has a cousin who does estate litigation." "Marcus," I said. Grandma was lucid. "She knew what she was doing. She knew you hadn't been here." He stood up. And he said something I have turned over many times since, trying to understand how someone gets to a place where they can say it. "You got 3 years of free rent out of this house. You got to play the devoted granddaughter, and now you get a $9 million reward for it. And you're going to stand there and act like that's fair." I didn't answer him. There was nothing to say that would have reached whatever part of him might have wanted to hear it. Vivienne said, "We'll be here for another week. We'd appreciate having the space to process this as a family." The implication was clear enough. They wanted me to leave. They wanted me to pack some things and go stay with Aunt Patricia or get a hotel room and give them the house while they decided whether they were going to sue. I said, "This is my home. I'm not leaving." Marcus said, "The trust isn't settled yet. Probate takes months. Technically nothing," I said. Mr. Calloway explained the trust structure. "It doesn't go through probate. Please don't confuse a will and a trust." I went upstairs. I heard them talking in the kitchen for another hour. Then I heard the front door close and the rental car starting and the sound of tires on the gravel drive fading down Orchard Hill Road. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. I want to tell you something true about grief, which is that it doesn't pause for drama. The whole time Marcus was in my kitchen, insinuating that I had manipulated my dying grandmother into giving me her house, I was also just a person who missed her grandmother terribly, who had cried in the shower every morning for 11 days, who had kept walking past the closed door of Grandma Dot's sewing room because she couldn't yet make herself go in. Those two things existed at the same time. I don't know how to make that less strange except to say that it was true. Marcus sent an email 2 days later through his cousin-in-law, the litigation attorney. It was formal and full of terms like undue influence and capacity evaluation and request for full accounting of all financial interactions. I printed it out and drove it to Mr. Calloway's office. Mr. Calloway read it. He set it on his desk. He said, "Your grandmother anticipated this possibility." He told me that when Grandma Dot had set up the trust, she had also provided Mr. Calloway with a written letter dated, notarized, witnessed by 2 people in which she described her reasons for the trust structure in her own words. She wrote about the 3 years I had been at the farmhouse. She wrote about what it had meant to her not to be alone. She wrote, in her careful, precise handwriting, that she was making this decision freely and fully, and that she wanted it understood that the decision came from love and from intention, and from the absolute clarity of a woman who had spent 78 years learning what mattered. She also wrote, "I know Marcus will be hurt. I hope someday he will understand that the farmhouse was always going to go to whoever was willing to tend it. The land asks something of you. Clara already knew that." Mr. Calloway said the letter made a challenge nearly impossible to pursue. He said Grandma Dot had been remarkably thorough. He said it with a small smile, like he had known her well enough to not be surprised. I drove back to Willowmere. I stopped at the farmhouse gate and sat there for a few minutes looking up the long driveway at the house. It was October, and the maples at the edge of the field had gone fully red. Grandma Dot had planted 3 of them herself, she always told me, the year she and my grandfather moved in. They were massive now, older than I was. In the afternoon light, they looked almost impossible. That specific shade of red that makes you feel like the world is trying to tell you something important. I did not call Marcus to tell him about the letter. I let Mr. Calloway's office send the formal response to the litigation inquiry. I didn't want to have a conversation in which he felt I was gloating, because I wasn't. I was just a woman standing at a gate looking at a house that her grandmother had trusted her with. The legal response was sent. The challenge did not proceed. I have not been entirely honest about the weeks that followed, because they were harder than I've made them sound. Marcus did not speak to me for 2 months. Aunt Patricia told me that Vivian had been calling various family members to share her version of events, and that version was not flattering to me. A cousin I had always liked stopped responding to my texts. I found out through someone else that Marcus had told Emma, who is 7, that Grandma Dot had made a mistake, and that they were trying to fix it. I thought about Emma believing that for a long time. I thought about the version of her grandmother she would grow up with, shaped by that story. I made decisions about the property. I renewed the studio barn leases 6 artists, all of them people Grandma Dot had personally selected, all of them good for another 3 years with rents held at current rates. I hired a property manager for the Burlington building. I had the farmhouse assessed and updated the insurance. I learned, slowly and through many phone calls I wasn't prepared for, what it actually meant to hold something. In late November, I drove to Burlington and sat in a coffee shop for 2 hours thinking about what I wanted to do. I had grown up in this part of Vermont. My grandfather was buried here. The farmhouse was on the National Historic Register. It had been built in 1887, and my grandparents had spent 30 years restoring it. It was not simply property. It was a place that had always been open. Grandma Dot had hosted Christmas for our entire extended family every year for as long as I could remember. The big dining room table seated 18. The barn had a loft where we slept as kids. The backfield was where my grandfather taught all of us to fly kites in the spring. That afternoon I called Aunt Patricia. I told her what I was thinking. I told her I wanted to formalize it to establish a family easement on the property that guaranteed the rest of the family the right to gather there for holidays and family events in perpetuity, regardless of what I did with the property long term. Not a trust, not shared ownership, just a documented right of return. Open door, always. Aunt Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, honey, Dot would have loved that." I called a property rights attorney. We drafted the easement. I sent a copy to Marcus through Mr. Calloway's office, with a letter I had rewritten many times, and the final version of which I will share with you in full because I think the words matter. Marcus, I am not sending this because I think it settles anything between us or makes anything easier. I'm sending it because Grandma wanted this house to remain a place for this family. That was not conditional on us being at peace with each other. You and Emma are welcome here. The door is open. I mean that without reservation and without conditions. Clara. He didn't respond for 3 weeks. When he did, it was a single line. Thank you for sending this. It was not an apology. It was not the thing I might have wanted it to be. But it was something, and I have learned in this last year to hold something carefully and not demand that it be more than it is. I am telling you this story in December, 14 months after Grandma Dot died. The farmhouse is decorated for Christmas the same way she always did it. Pine boughs on the mantel, the ceramic nativity set she bought in Italy in 1989, the same 12 candles in the front windows. I bought the exact same brand of ginger tea she drank, and I make it in her yellow kettle, and I sit in her chair at the kitchen table in the mornings. Marcus and Emma came for Thanksgiving. Vivienne did not come, and I did not ask why. Emma is 7 and wonderful, and has no idea what happened between the adults in her family, only that she got to sleep in the loft barn, and that I made her grandmother's apple cake, and that she found 4 arrowheads in the back field that she is keeping in a jar in her room in Albany. Marcus and I did not talk about the estate or the trust or the certified letter. We talked about Emma's school play and the first real snow of the season and the deer we could see from the kitchen window at dusk. It was not comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when nothing happened. It was something more complicated than comfortable. But we were at the same table. We passed the same food. When Emma knocked over her apple cider and burst into tears, we both grabbed for napkins at the same moment, and our hands bumped, and we looked at each other, and Marcus laughed first. It wasn't fixed, but it was a beginning of something. I think about what Grandma Dot wrote in her letter sometimes. The land asks something of you, and I am still learning what she meant. I think she meant that a place isn't just a place. That a house isn't just a house. That what you inherit is never only the thing itself, but also the obligation to it, the responsibility to what it has been and what it could still become. She left me something harder than money. She left me the job of holding it. Some days that feels like a weight I didn't ask for. Most days, honestly, it feels like grace. The marigolds she planted along the back fence came up in the spring without anyone doing anything. I found that out in April when I went out one morning, and there they were, bright and orange in the cold Vermont light, like she had left them on purpose, like she was still tending something. Maybe she was. I'm not sentimental by nature. I'm a practical person. I measure twice. I keep a budget. I read contracts carefully, and I do not sign things I don't understand. But I stood in that back field in April looking at my grandmother's marigolds, and I thought, some things are too careful to be explained. Some things are just love. She knew who was going to be here. She planned for the people who would stay. The greatest thing she left me wasn't the farmhouse or the land or any of the numbers in any of the documents. It was the understanding that showing up, actually showing up, for the hard years and the slow years and the quiet years is not a sacrifice. It's the whole point. It is the whole point. I go to the cemetery on her birthday in March, and I leave marigolds on her grave, the same way she used to leave them for my grandfather. I bring my coffee in a thermos, and I sit there for a while. I tell her what's happening, the studio artists, the new lease in Burlington, the crack in the barn foundation I'm having repaired in the spring, the small news of a place being tended. I think she hears it. I think she knew she would.